Welcome to the Night Tube. I'm Stephen Knight, and I'm very fortunate to have with me writer and activist Graham Linehan. Graham, how are you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
No, nice to meet you again.
You too, yeah. It might be worth mentioning that I bumped into you in Edinburgh September last year. I just looked it up before we started, and I was reporting from a women's rights demonstration outside Parliament against some legislation being pushed by Scottish politicians, and I spied you, and I thought I'd wander over and ask you about sort of a mutual connection in a way. I've spent a little bit of time with Mark Meechan, also known as Count Dankula, on various panels and events, and so around about, I think, 2018, I would have had you pegged for somebody who was incredibly woke, someone possibly in favour of what's known as cancellation culture. Basically, I would have expected someone like you to have pronouns in your bio, trans flags, etc., and you haven't. What exactly has changed between that time and where you are now, then, ideologically?
Well, the problem isn't so much that I've changed. The problem is that I've been consistent. The first time I started to get cancelled was when I started objecting to the burqa, I remember at the time there was a lot of, it's their culture and stuff like this, and it seemed to me a lot of liberals deliberately ignoring a kind of misogyny that was apparent when it's a blazing hot day and you've got women covered head to toe in black. And I spoke up about that. And that was the first time that my own side started to get suspicious of me, because this was at the time when they were all pretending to care about Muslim people. Of course, they completely forgot about that when they started pushing for an end to sex segregation, which, of course, Muslim women, observant Muslim religious people would not be able to go along with. So I realised, I've realised as I go along that the liberal or the left are essentially, they're just another political animal. There's enough, I did have a very innocent view of the left and the right, and a very silly good versus evil. It was based on a few things, like, I couldn't understand why anyone would not try to help fight climate change when I was noticing the climate changing myself. It's like, when you're wearing a t-shirt in October, then things are not great. So I started kind of, my big thing was any kind of denialism, historical revisionism. These were all things I associated with the right. You had David Irving with Holocaust denial in the 80s. Then you had climate change denial. Although my feelings on that are a little bit more nuanced now as well because of what I've been through. But my feeling was that the right was the side of anti-science, ideological, ideology over humanity, over compassion and all these things. And then suddenly the left turned around and just started doing the exact same thing, and it took me a while to realise that, not only was I a victim of all this, but I had been a participant in it early on as well. What I would do is, like, if I didn't like someone's comedy output for whatever reason, and I heard they were right wing, kind of gave me a carte blanche to be as nasty as I wanted to be about their motives and their comedy. And I think that liberated a terrible part of me for a while there. And I always say that to people, if I ever get my Twitter account back, I'm going to lock it, and then I'm going to delete every tweet I did before I got into this fight, because I no longer can be certain I took the right stand on anything.
It's funny about that. Before we started having, because I remember a disagree. I think you had blocked me on Twitter.
I'm sorry.
That's fine. It's neither here nor there. You should always block on Twitter for any reason. But I thought I'd just have a quick search to see what's the worst thing I've said to you. And luckily, the worst thing I could find was around about 2018 when I tweeted, if Twitter was a superhero movie, Graham Linehan would be the evil overlord of planet leftism. Now, obviously, that's comedic hyperbole, but I suppose with you saying you were consistent there, what's happened is you've remained consistent. I think when I wandered over,
consistent when it comes to women's rights. That's
got
been,
you right.
I've never veered off that for anyone. You know.
Well, when I wandered over to you in Edinburgh to ask you about Mark Meechan, and I'm not sure if anyone else had done that on the record since, and I fully expected to be picking a fight with you on that topic. And I was very taken aback, almost disappointed, I have to be honest, at how reasonable you were and how candid you were and how you opened your hands up and basically said, yep, I think I got that one wrong. And obviously I don't want to dwell on this issue for too much longer. There's lots more to be getting into. But is there anything else you want to say about that whole thing, given you've reflected on it over the last few years or so?
Well, I'm not sure really. I mean, I apologise to Mark. I did a little short film for his for a roast he did. I didn't want to go to the thing itself because I'm still embarrassed. I'm embarrassed,
Yeah.
So I didn't do that, but I'm sure we'll meet up someday. I'm trying to broaden out what I talk about and who I talk to. So we might end up doing a video together at some point or something like that. But I don't know. I mean, all I could say is we're now. I'm in with a group of women. I'm allying myself with a group of women who are being called Nazis and funded by the right and all this sort of thing. And it's all a complete lie. There's not an ounce of truth in it. And when you're at the centre of something and you see people like Owen Jones and Jolie and Mom and people like this, when you see them point blank lying to people's faces about things that are not true, you know that they're lying, then it's a very destabilising thing because people like him and people like John Ronson and all these other people, they have such a secure place in the kind of culture that it just blows my mind every time I see them lying, and it's been very destabilising, and it made me look at Mark and think, oh, maybe I was responding to a similar campaign that was launched against me, a similar kind of focusing on things that are, like, for instance, I took it as very suspicious that he was being retweeted by Stormfront, the far right website. But then I realized, well, they can retweet what they want. It's not really his fault what they put up. So that combined with I remember there was a piece going around that was about. It was written by who I now believe is probably just a right wing troll, who was basically just saying, how you can disguise your intentions with humour. And I thought that your right-wing racist intentions with humour. And I thought that that's what Mark was doing. And I now realise that Mark was just doing nothing of the sort. He was just having fun online, the way we should all be allowed to. And my kind of twisted view, created by the echo chamber I was in, led me to come after him 20,000 times much more harder than I should have done. In fact, one of the things, even though I'm disappointed by that David Baddiel has never really gotten involved in the fight, I'm involved because I think that every moral human being should be involved in this fight because it's about children's health and it's about women's rights. I still think that David has to be congratulated for the way he gave Mark the benefit of the doubt, and he wrote a very good piece about it that I was very blind to, So, that's where I am on it, I mean...
Fuck's sake, being so reasonable again. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do from here. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Also, something struck me as true moments ago when you were talking about how when you focused your attention on the burqa, that's when the labels started coming and you realised, oh, actually, I was in a tribe before and now I'm being rejected. I had the same experience, really. I'm a left-wing liberal, remain so. I feel like my principles have remained constant. And I used to spend a lot of my time going for Christianity, mocking creationist, the anti-scientific claims. And then when I slightly pivoted towards Islam with that mindset, that's when the accusations came. Similar with gender ideology now. I use the same tools in that direction. And now I'm a transphobe as well as an Islamophobe. So I'm collecting all the labels, as I'm sure you are. But I suppose the question you'll probably get asked a lot, and it never really makes a lot of sense to me, but people always want to hear an answer, is why this issue for you? Because they'll say to people like you, well, you're a grown man, you don't really have any skin in the game. This is an issue that disproportionately affects women. So was there one particular incident that kind of piqued your interest in this, or have you just kind of fallen into this row by accident?
I think the thing that really I thought I can't deal with this anymore was when Amnesty Ireland, when I had joined with Amnesty Ireland to try and repeal the 8th Amendment in Ireland, which was the amendment that prevented abortion. So I was working very closely with Amnesty at that time. I travelled the country with well, not the country. We went from Belfast to Dublin, travelled through the country.
Through a country.
With Colm Gorman, who I thought was a brilliant man. You know, I thought, here's a very good example. I thought Amnesty could do no wrong. To be anti-torture, to be to be pro-human rights. For me, Amnesty was like, I was so proud to be involved in it. I was so proud of the part my wife and I played in repealing the law in Ireland. But then we won it, and Amnesty Ireland released a tweet saying, a huge victory for pregnant people. Now, my wife really opened up about our abortion. My ex-wife, I should say, really opened up about what we went through. And for her, and for women like her, to be rewarded with this slap in the face, where they're removed from the scene of their greatest victory over the Church of Ireland that had held them under their thumb for so many years, you know. So basically what's happened in Ireland is just one thumb came off and another one went on. So that was the thing that kind of, you know, I thought I can't be quiet about this anymore. This is getting crazy. But along the way, you know, I would turn the thing and I would say, why isn't everyone interested in this? We're talking about children. We're talking about children who, you know, if you hear the stories of detransitioners, they're all very similar. It's all about, you know, finding a tribe, feeling accepted, going through the normal stuff that adolescents go through, and kind of latching onto a trans label as a way out of some of that pain. Now, you know, that could easily happen to my daughter. It could happen to anyone's daughter. Like anorexia and bulimia and all these things, this is a social contagion that affects most of all young women. They are the ones who really are going to suffer because of this, because the effect of testosterone on their bodies is so powerful. Many of them don't even know they're going to go into menopause 30 years too early, you know? And menopause is not, like we had an episode of Father Ted where someone says, I don't want to catch the menopause. I wrote that down when there was a bunch of old people who were kind of invading the house like zombies. And I remember writing that line with a vague idea of what the menopause is. Now I know what it is, and it's like, it's a kind of a, you know, it's one of those things that even when you hit it at 50 or whatever your age is, you're going to have a tough time. And these poor girls think they're turning into boys, when in fact they're turning into 50-year-old women, you know? And I just don't understand why more people aren't more well read about it. I don't understand why people aren't braver about it. It's not like we're talking about something, you know, remote. We're talking about the kids who are right next to us. And that's another aspect to it. You know, I know so many people whose relationships with their kids or with their nieces or with their friends have been completely destroyed by this ideology. You know, I know one director who made a very moving film about the trans issue. His best man has now been ordered never to speak to him again. You know, these kinds of stories are legion. You know, I'm hearing. You know, one of the first people I met, lovely guy, and he had just come off a 2-week bender. He was an alcoholic, and he'd fallen off the wagon, or whatever the phrase is, jumped on it. I can't remember what the phrase is.
I think that's right. Yeah,
fallen off the wagon because his daughter was taking testosterone and was basically disappearing before his eyes. You know, her jaw changing, facial hair, you know, all these things. And he knew that it was a massive mistake, and that in 10 years she'll just be a detransitioner, who's regretted what they've done to what she's done to her body, but he can't stop her. He can't stop her because there are no adults in the room. There's no one around saying, "Hang on a sec, we have to slow down. We have to look at." Although actually I say that, but luckily the cast report has put the brakes on things pretty good, and mermaids look like they're in trouble, which is great news. My thing was no adults were speaking about this. Like, you can't get scientists won't speak about it. One of my themes with all this is that because it's an inversion of the truth, trans women are women, which is basically like saying men are women. Then when you have an inversion of the truth at the center of a philosophy, suddenly no one can do their jobs. Police can't police. Journalists can't tell the truth because they're referring to paedophiles as she, and Eddie Izzard is she. they're lying to people's faces. Comedians get thrown off the Pleasance in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Because no one is allowed to do their jobs. No one is allowed to tell the truth. And so what we have at the moment is we have a kind of a very top-heavy ideology that's going to topple over at any moment, and is only being held up by the kind of combined will of all these idiotic activists who work in every single organisation in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, keeping on that theme of idiotic activists, you know better than anyone that they will use any tool available to sort of destroy your reputation. And one of them ways is obviously editing Wikipedia profiles. And I don't know how often you go on yours, but I think you described as Irish writer and anti-transgender activist. Well,
we've tried to change that, and every time we change it, it changes back within 15 minutes.
So you're not Irish?
Oh, I am Irish. Oh, that's a good joke. Yeah.
So, I mean, I suppose some people would want to hear that cleared up from you anyway. I mean, in terms of being anti-transgender, is that even fair? How do you view transgender people as individuals?
Well, first of all, we have to say what we're describing when we say transgender people. My argument is that if there was at one point, and I think someone like Graham Norton today, when he started talking about it on the day, I've heard on the Today program, I've heard him talk about this before, and he appears to think we're talking about transsexuals, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is that Stonewall came in and they changed the definition of trans from transsexuals to basically anyone who feels a bit funny. If you wear a bit of eyeshadow, if you like wearing an earring. Like, you see this all the time now. Straight couples identifying as queer because one of them, wears long eyelashes or something. And it's a kind of, I think what happened with Stonewall is that they realised that there was a great resource in this kind of very deliberately obscure condition, So when they said trans people are being this, they could talk about transsexuals, and it would be true, but they wouldn't actually be referring to most of the people who call themselves trans. So I realised that very quickly, that trans didn't mean anything. Trans usually it just means the opposite to whatever word it comes before. In fact, that's a useful way of thinking of it. Trans woman means man, trans man means woman, etc., etc. And I just realised that this was being used to silence people. It was being used to silence very important discussions about safeguarding, about women's only spaces, about feminism. It's a silencing authoritarian movement. And I think the greatest threat to democracy we've had in years, you've seen what happened to Toby Young recently. I believe that's because of his work with people, with gender critical people.
I think you may be right there, but I think also it could be something to do with the Daily Sceptic and a lot of the COVID vaccination misinformation that he is guilty. I've had Toby on the show, and I'm a paid up member of the Free Speech Union, for instance, and agree with him on a lot of things, but I do think the Daily Sceptic is a bit dodgy in general, but I suppose that's still up in the air as to whether that comes under free speech and whether PayPal should be able to just close that down.
Well, maybe there's an argument, like if you're talking about COVID misinformation. But then again, what is COVID misinformation? We don't know anymore. One of the big problems with where we are at the moment as a society is we literally do not know who to believe. If another massive pandemic happened, good luck to the government trying to get anybody to do anything.
Yeah.
Because no one knows whether they were all just conned for a few years, or whether their life expectancy is being shortened, as some people like Brett Weinstein have said about some of the vaccines. No one knows. We don't know. I don't even know. I'm not even sure I'm 100% on climate change anymore, because I've been lied to so conclusively by all the people I used to trust. You know, the Guardian is the Guardian's behaviour around the Wee Spa incident, which they tried to smear that story. They did everything they could to frame it as a hoax, because of course it proves everything that so-called TERFs have been saying for years. And this is what it comes down to, Stephen. The problem is not trans women in women's spaces. The problem is men in women's spaces identifying as trans women. That's the problem. The reason I used to do things like, I once went on Her, which is the lesbian dating app, and called myself a lesbian. And I took a picture that is just like this, like you see me now, and got on. And my point was that there's a lot of men who are doing it for real. And they're insulting, coercing, abusing these lesbians on these apps. Lesbians do not have women-only apps anymore. Neither do gay men. Grindr has trans men on the app, which a lot of gay men find really uncomfortable. You know, it's a weird kind of enforcing of bisexuality onto homosexuals, and it's like, how can anyone think this is right?
We did move very quickly from individual rights for trans people to, if lesbians don't accept cock, they're bigoted. Yeah, that's exactly. A very strange way. I mean, you are somebody who's been involved in and written and created some of the most successful British comedy I can think of. You know, I'm a massive fan of Big Train myself. Father Ted was massive. The IT Crowd, Jam, traumatized me a little bit. But there's this perception from outsiders like me looking in that comedy is a very ultra-liberal space, certainly successful mainstream comedy. And it seems to be that you kind of found that out firsthand, really, when it all came tumbling down career-wise in terms of, you know, your prominence in that area. And at what point did you realise you was in trouble in that respect?
Oh, just when the jobs stopped coming in, or when the jobs I already had started getting cancelled. Like, for instance, I was asked to write, this was a dream job I had, I was asked to write a companion piece for Peter Shaffer's Black Comedy, which is one of the funniest farces ever written. But it's only an hour long, so there could have been, basically they asked me to write the play that would travel with Black Comedy. And not only that, but Sonia Friedman told me that it would be permanently travelling with Black Comedy, because there's a kind of a tradition of different plays going before it, but they wanted something to permanently travel with it. So that was a huge opportunity for me, and I was just delighted, because it's such a great play. If you look it up later on, you'll see how clever the conceit is. So that fell through. Then Frontier Productions in Australia, a guy called Jeff Green had invited me to do some comedy masterclasses in Perth and Sydney, I think. And that was cancelled as well. And Jeff used, I found out later, that very sneaky, basically a lie, which is that they couldn't afford the security. You know, that's just their excuse for cancelling you. But it's just cowardice. They're frightened of their own comedians. They're frightened of their own staff. They're frightened of getting letters. They're frightened of getting Twitter bombed. You know what I mean? None of them have any courage. You know, none of them have any principles. They fold like a cheap suit every time. And the thing is, all this would take is a few people saying, no, don't, you know, no, we're not going to do that. Like Netflix did when it fired all its woke staff, which was brilliant. That's what everybody should do.
Yeah, they're not used to hearing the word no, unfortunately. But, I mean, as you've said there, you're asking for more people to speak out in the industry. And I agree, and I think that's a great idea too, and that's the only way we're going to really make it more comfortable for other people to speak out. But then when people look at what happened to you, it's almost like a cautionary tale for them. They have the choice between sticking their neck out on what I agree is a massively important consequential issue, or still managing to get those lovely BBC panel show slots. So,
sure.
I mean, how can you convince someone to jeopardise their livelihood, career, for an issue that they probably don't have too much skin in themselves?
Well, you know, I have a rule, which is there's a few people who I don't really expect to jump to my defence. Actors, for instance. I don't think actors really. I mean, their lives are so. Their careers are so much in other people's hands that you can't really ask an actor to. So I don't feel bad that all my old actor friends haven't spoken up for me. You know, Matt Berry distanced himself from me in a piece and then rang me straight after and apologised, and I really appreciated that. But with other people, you can't really ask them to be brave. I can't phone up Armando Iannucci and say, you really should be talking about this. I can't ask him to put his career on the line. All I've been doing is I have been saying, having private meetings with people and saying, this is what's happening, you've got to speak about it. And no one will do it. And the thing is, it's like Derek Jensen said, actually one person did it, James Dreyfus did it, and his life was destroyed, his career was destroyed.
Right.
But the thing is, what people don't realise is, if a few people stood up, it would be harder to target the individuals. Like, the reason I've been beaten up in the dark by people like con man like Stephanie Hayden, or C-list actors like David Paisley, is because they there's no support. There's no one to rush to my aid. There's no one to say, hang on a sec, Graham's not saying this or that. No, they've had 5 years to say, oh, maybe Graham has a choice about, or maybe Graham has a point about puberty blockers, or maybe Graham has a point about the abuse that women like J.K. Rowling are receiving. But they don't. They they'll opine on everything else under the sun, but they won't talk about this. I went to Dara O'Brien's stag night, He hasn't said a word to me since this happened. Doesn't respond to my emails.
Oh wow!
I asked him if he would sign the letter supporting J.K. Rowling in the face of death threats and rape threats, and he said no. He said he found it confusing, and then a few weeks later, he's calling Eddie Izzard she in a tweet. Say, oh, you didn't find it confusing to call, when you're calling your fellow mate a man, when you're happily affording him more rights. As a man, rights that you will share, because if any man can say they're a woman and walk into a women's space, then you're arguing for those rights for yourself. So,
since we name dropping, and you seem to have reached the fuck it level in terms of just burning bridges with former friends, and
well, let me just say one thing. I'll just say one thing on that. My rule is that if people don't speak about it, I tend not to bother them. But if people speak about everything else under the sun and not this subject, especially if they hold a kind of moral or ethical kind of, if they are always taking that kind of approach, which most people on Twitter are, then I think it's fair enough to name them and say, this is you're being dishonest, you're being you're actually, like when Dara O'Brien calls Eddie Izzard she, he's kind of going along with an ideology that is putting gay children in danger. Not that there's such a thing as gay children, but you know what I mean. Gender non-conforming children in danger. Because, effeminate girls or effeminate boys, butch girls, tomboys, are walking down the toy aisle, or the so-called wrong toy aisle, and they're coming out the other end as a different sex. And, this is just negating gay rights. It negates women's rights. It negates everything. So it's a moral imperative to speak up against it, I think.
Okay, so with that being said, I did see you release a video a little while back, and you seemed very angry with Stewart Lee. And there are a million reasons why one might be angry with Stewart Lee, obviously, given some of his output over the years. But what is your specific issue with what he said on this topic? Well,
Stewart Lee kind of did this weird list, like a 12-year-old girl, one year, where he basically put some people on a pedestal and other people in a pedal bin.
That's clever.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I was in the pedal bin, and Jolien Mom, who's suing the LGB Alliance at the moment, and Owen Jones were on the pedestal. Now Stewart Lee went to Oxford with Owen Jones, and Stewart Lee's entire act is about sneering at more successful comedians, and you can see his contempt for, basically, Stewart and Owen are part of the establishment.
Yeah.
And their contempt for ordinary people is apparent in a lot of, especially Stewart's material about people like Ricky Gervais and stuff like that. It's basically like, you should like what I like. I'm he's a natural ruler, and he's got that kind of Oxford arrogance, So, he was kind of like, I know he's kind of, if he's supporting Owen Jones, then he's supporting Owen Jones despite the fact that Owen Jones bullied a schoolgirl, has bullied colleagues who are feminists, Owen Jones is a bully who hates women. And for Stewart Lee to support him and to throw me in the bin for it must be for the activism, because I haven't done any actual comedy writing in 5 years. I've just been fighting this shit. But here's my problem with these people like Stewart Lee. They're so cowardly and dishonest that they will never say to your face where they disagree with your analysis. Like, everyone will kind of just say, they'll insinuate things, they'll say I belong in the pedal bin, all this sort of stuff. They'll never say what they disagree with. So I always, my thing is to try and call them out and try and do videos where I say, well, what do you believe? Do you believe that lesbians have dicks? Then say it. But they won't say it because they're too cowardly to put down their position. But they will set themselves up on the side of the mob. Like, basically, Stewart Lee genuflects to the mob every time he, opens his mouth these days. They own him. They own him. And I just find it. Well, I don't know. I mean, I just think, now he's a legitimate target because he's harming people. He's harming people by pretending not to understand this issue.
It's strange, isn't it? Because a lot of the time, comedians that get involved in sort of social and political causes were always incredibly useful in the way that they would take a swing at the power and the authority and blasphemies and dogmas. And that, if you can do that with comedy, for me, that's the ultimate form of destruction. If you can destroy somebody with humour, that's so powerful. And we tend to look to comedians to challenge these things, and it seems to me like this gender ideology at the moment is the one big thing that needs comedy to attack it, ridicule it, mockery, etc. It's ripe. I mean, it's an ideology that believes a man can be a woman, for God's sake. It just seems ripe for comedy in every sense, but they won't touch it whilst at the same time patting themselves on the back for being champions of truth or speaking truth to power even. And I suppose I get this a little bit. I get private messages from people and they always start with a phrase along the line of, look, I agree with what you say, but I can't say it publicly because of my job, A, B and C. You must get a ton of that kind of thing.
Well, no, I mean, I think most people probably wisely realise that I'll turn them in. I know that's not true. I had, like, there are some big name people who have supported me privately and they've been great. Unfortunately, they were a bit disappointing then when I asked them to sign the J.K. Rowling letter, and then they didn't do it, or they just ignored my calls. There are. It's definitely fear that's keeping people quiet, but also it's ignorance. I mean, I do have a lot of sympathy for people because, let's say you regularly take The Guardian, okay? Then you're just not going to know about any of this stuff because The Guardian will not report on these issues unless it puts the trans movement in a positive light. And if it doesn't put the trans movement in a positive light, they'll either ignore it completely or misrepresent it as they did with the wee spa. So I do think that people are just kind of almost through no fault of their own ignorant. Everybody's memories go back to the abuses of the Murdoch papers and in the 90s, I think it was, when they were found to be bugging people and stuff like that. And I always remember reading that and thinking the thing that shocked me most about those stories was that they dehumanized these celebrities to such an extent that they were quite unashamed about, like, putting a camera inside someone's sink, so you get an EastEnders star snorting up some cocaine or something like that, or following someone, or bugging someone's phone, and it's someone who is the only person who could have known about a thing, and you just destroy the relationship with their friend because their friend thinks this person must have told.
Yeah,
you know, like, for me, it was almost like a kind of, you know, it was a mild outrage, if that makes sense, you know, because they were dehumanizing these people. But then they started dehumanizing women as TERFs, and the celebrities went right along with it. It was, you know, and so what happens is everybody still. Sorry, this was not my point. My actual point was everyone's still got these memories of the abuses of the press, especially the Murdoch press. But, you know, now we're living in a time when the Murdoch press are the only ones reporting on this huge scandal, this huge safeguarding scandal. But the Guardian readers are still living in the same past, if you know what I mean, where they haven't really realised any of this, and they still only read the Guardian or only trust the Guardian. And it's the same with our online bubbles. You know, I mean, part of the reason I got things. You know, I'm not absolving myself of any of the blame, but I was, you know, too influenced by people I was following on Twitter who were filling my head with the idea that the far right were having a moment, and they kind of were. But kind of Brexit was it, and so was Trump. That was the moment, and it's been and gone, and we're all still around, and everything's still okay. For me, the as I said earlier, the real threat to democracy is this movement. You know, because it is so fundamentally anti-human, anti-truth, you know, anti-compassion. There's no forgiveness in this movement. There's no warmth. There's no nuance. There's no humour. This is a horrible, you know, death cult. As Richie Herron, who's suing the NHS for his transition, put it. He points out it's all about death. It's all about dead naming, and, you know. It's all about suicide statistics. It's all, you know, killing yourself to get hormones, all this sort of stuff. You know, it's a death cult.
You used a word there that made me think of something else, actually, and that's safeguarding. And that's an issue that many of us saw problems with a mile away. And I know you're aware of an incident that was reported on via a young girl's TikTok account the other day, a young girl named Charlotte. Now, she was in a changing room in Cambridge, I believe, and a group of men were there, and it's a unisex changing room, and two members of that male party walked in on her while she was changing, opened her curtain in her changing room, and she released a video of this, and she's quite clearly distraught and traumatized. Yes. And to me, it's not surprising that kind of thing would happen. We all knew unisex shared spaces, gender neutral, that would lead to more assaults, more voyeurism, more invasions of privacy. We all knew that would happen. What was even more upsetting to me about that was watching her also defend the ideology that placed her in that position. She praised the idea of unisex changing rooms because they're inclusive. She praised the staff at Primark who helped her afterwards. She's obviously a decent person, wanting to do the right thing. But this kind of just shows how deeply embedded this ideology has gotten in the British youth as well, doesn't it? If they're defending the very systems that are creating these outcomes.
It's one of the most heartbreaking videos I've ever seen. It's like, for me, it's you know, when they talk about waves of feminism, third wave feminism is the name they give this current form that puts cross-dressing men almost at the centre of women's rights. And this poor woman is a victim of it. She's been completely disempowered by this movement. She's thanking her abusers, and her abusers in this case are Primark. You know, because Primark put her in that situation. You know, there's this idea, I don't know, like, and the arguments you hear against these things we've had for 100 years, like sex segregation, are things like, well, men will do it anyway. What kind of excuse is that? You're supposed to make it harder for men to do that.
Yeah. And roll out the red carpet.
Exactly. And that's what they're doing. They're rolling out the red carpet to abusive men. And once again, transsexuals are not the people who we're worried about. We're worried, to use the language of the other side, a word I'd never use except to make fun of people. These are cis men. You know, cis men dressing up as women are not trans. They're still cis men. And these are the men who are, they're going into prison. In California, they're handing out rubbers in prison because, there's been pregnancies in California prisons. There's a bloke in Limerick prison called Barbie Kardashian. And Barbie Kardashian is one of the most violent people you'll ever see. He's a deeply disturbed young man who has even threatened his mother's life. And he's in Limerick women's prison, So it's like you say, none of this stuff is necessary. These people suffering, they never had to suffer. Not one woman had to suffer. Because anyone with a brain can see if you put men in women's prisons, you're going to get these consequences. Anyone with a brain can see if you make changing rooms unisex, you're going to get these consequences. But for some reason, this current brand of leftist, they have to see the bodies, they have to see the pain, and they have to see the wreckage, before they'll do anything. And my thing has always been, no, we don't need to see any of the wreckage. We can work to prevent the wreckage,
Well, you mentioned the idea of this ideology toppling or being soon to be toppled, and I kind of agree with that. It seems like there is a fair bit of momentum with people who have an appreciation for reality now. And what's that going to look like when it happens, do you think? Do you think the people who, aided and abetted this ideology and, led to the mutilation of children, assaults on women, things like that, are they going to do the whole sort of communist tactic of pretending they were never involved or for it in the first place, do you think? Is there going to be a day of reckoning?
That's going to be quite hard because they've got, I'm collecting receipts at the moment for everyone who's praised mermaids, and we're going to put it up on the website and make sure people don't forget. Because this has been, for me, the thing it reminds me most of is the satanic panic,
Yes.
It's like a kind of accepted reality that actually isn't true at all, or if it is true, it's a slight, it's a bending of the truth, like I said earlier with, for instance, I'll give you an example. They have the murder rates for trans people are supposedly like massacre going on all the time.
Supposed to be open season on trans people, isn't it?
They call it the trans Holocaust.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's based on some statistics on sex workers in I think Brazil.
Yeah.
That were then extrapolated across the whole world as if they affect every trans person everywhere. But they only affect these people who are desperate, who are getting into cars with strange men.
Yeah.
So it's another example of the dishonesty that's trying to create a kind of a
moral panic, isn't it?
A moral panic, yes, exactly.
I think it's very strange to find that people are very disappointed when you tell them how misrepresented them stats are. I mean, this is good news, surely, that it's very rare that trans people will be killed for being trans. This is a cause for celebration, surely.
Well, it's very funny when people trick people into complaining to Jess Phillips every year about her list of dead women that there's no trans people in it, because there's rarely any trans people killed, So it's great when that happens. Yeah, it's a phantom suffering that no one can actually point to the people who are suffering. And when you see examples of trans people, you just see people like Rachel Levine, who's having a rare old time of it. People who have already had life on easy setting by being white men, and now they've supercharged that by, like, basically calling yourself trans is a way then that you can say to fellow white people, that's racist. It's basically white men wanted to say that's racist to people about themselves, and transphobia is a way of doing that, because it's the phrase is so ill-defined. The state and the state is so ill-defined, and the idea of transphobia is so ill-defined that no one can observe its rules consistently, and so you're always on tenterhooks. You're always looking over your shoulder. You're always checking your language. You'll see things change every day. Like one day, trans women is the correct usage, and the next day it's trans women. And if you say trans women, you're suddenly a bigot again. The rules change all the time, and so what you have really in the end, I think, Stephen, is a form of ideological control by some very, very mendacious and dishonest people. Owen Jones is the perfect example.
I walked past Owen Jones in Euston Station on Saturday, and you can just kind of sense evil in the air. It's one of those moments. But I mean, you mentioned something interesting there about ideological control. And I suppose that's exemplified in the way you were talking about Dara O'Brien before and referring to Eddie Izzard as she, because I think ideologically there probably wouldn't be a whole lot of difference between you and Dara. You probably would, you obviously did get on quite well, but now because he's using the language of this ideology, battle lines have been drawn strangely in ways they probably wouldn't on other disagreements. So how much of an imposition have they had on the language? How far has this reached?
Well, it's genuinely frightening that, you have words disappearing within the NHS, for example. When I was on, I did Michael Portillo's show, and he asked me a question that I didn't really answer brilliantly, so maybe I can try again here. But he said, "What does it mean when somewhere is captured?" Basically, what it means when an organisation is captured is that it is suddenly adopting the beliefs of gender identity ideology wholesale, right? So they're using phrases like sex assigned at birth, and so it's kind of that's just reached right into the NHS. The NHS is unfortunately completely captured. So is Amnesty and all these charities. Liberty is captured. Liberty, like Amnesty and Liberty, also didn't speak up for J.K. Rowling. Can you believe that?
That's incredible.
Liberty didn't speak up for her.
Yeah.
So it's again, you have a situation that is so insane, it just means that no one can do the things that they were set up to do. Stonewall is now fighting for straight people. Amnesty is now, condemning women like J.K. Rowling. It's, Colm O'Gorman said that feminists should be silenced who had gender critical opinions, It's despicable behaviour from these men. So yeah, it is kind of strange that the fault line that is opened so widely. But I guess it's a bit like, what was that joke? I think someone used to do about Catholics and Protestants. Like, Catholics wouldn't have a problem with a Muslim, but if you slightly change if you don't agree slightly with something, then people are going to war for years, and it's possibly true. This particular war, if you notice, Stephen, it only affects people on the left. It destroys people on the left. That's who it's intended to destroy. People on the right don't give a fuck. You never see, or poker players. You never see poker players saying George misgendered Stephen yesterday. It's only left-wing people who are following these shibboleths, and they're only these left-wing people who are in danger of transgressing them and losing their livelihoods.
Yeah, I think the whole idea that the left eat their own and the right recruit seems to be true, doesn't it? Unfortunately, I just want to get your thought on something you must have seen. And it's been quite big on Twitter, big being the operative word, and that's the images coming out of Canada of this school teacher who's a bloke in a very short dress, and I'm not sure how to describe what are sort of ginormous prosthetic breasts with erect nipples on the end, very tight top. It's clear to any sane individual this is kind of like fetish gear. Yeah. Now, there's been a bit of a split thought on this, and I suppose whichever side of it's the truth, the people on the side of reality win. Now, it could be that this person is genuinely playing out a fetish in school, and the school is going along with it out of some sort of misguided commitment to inclusion, or it could be somebody taking the piss to expose these stupid rules. What's your instinct here?
It's such an extraordinary. I've been fighting this for 5 years now. And I've kind of given up saying that couldn't be true.
Yeah.
because like every time you see something insane, like for instance, one of the earliest things that happened in this was so-called Jessica Yaniv asking immigrant beauticians to wax his male genitalia, even though they stressed that they were women only, then trying to sue them and destroy their businesses. That bloke is still on Twitter, I believe, and Meghan Murphy is not. Meghan Murphy is the feminist who said that's him about him, and Twitter used that excuse to.
Oh no, she said men aren't women. I think that's what got her.
That was mine too. That was mine.
Right,
yeah, I said men aren't women though, but like I think what they really got me for was saying "okay, groomer" to everybody, because I used it as shorthand. Because basically, when all these people are coming at you with the exact same arguments, and you've already leveled them. And you know what they are. Like basically, trans rights activists have a number of phrases they love saying over and over again. Trans rights are human rights, which is completely meaningless. What are the other ones?
Trans women are women.
Trans women are women. Genitals. You're obsessed with genitals. All this sort of stuff. These are the kind of things they use to shut down debate and keep people in line. So I just got a bit sick of endlessly hearing these same arguments. So I would just reply, "Okay, groomer," And in fact, I think I was the one who invented it. I was the one who I think I popularized "Okay, groomer."
Right, I shall have your Wikipedia profile updated after this conversation under the achievement section.
Yeah, and I'm happy about it because it's like it's such an important thing to get across to people. This is a grooming operation. A whole, I knew a social worker who said, it only takes a few people to groom an organisation, and it only takes a few groomed organisations to groom a society. And that's what Stonewall have been doing over the last 10 years. And that's what Mermaids have done. And that's what, has happened to Liberty and all these other groups I thought were great. Amnesty and fucking Hacked Off, God forgive me, for ever thinking they were anything other than a bunch of chancers. All of these people are just 100% on board with this ideology, despite the fact there is no evidence that backs them up. There's no evidence that there's such a thing as trans children. There's no evidence of a gender identity that we all have. In fact, a lot of the evidence is pointing towards transitioning, leaving people more unhappy, with greater instances of suicidal ideation and so on. So, it's deliberate ignorance, and it infuriates me.
There's a lot of scandals coming down the line, I believe, on this issue when the data's in and the accounting's been done. I suppose as well, people often say that people like you and I who are going for gender ideology are punching down in a way, and that's ridiculous when you
at white men.
Yeah,
we're punching at white men. Basically, white men have discovered the biggest cheat code they've ever discovered, and we're supposedly punching down at these white men, like Rachel Levine, or whatever, the bloke in Ireland who's father of 3 and is now speaking at the International Day of the Girl Award. You know what I mean? It's not punching down. White men are white. Like I'm not one of these big white men bashers or whatever. In fact, my son's going to be a white man, so I really hope that he has a happy life, and I don't believe in any of that kind of divisive.
You don't know that he's not going to identify as black yet.
Well, yeah, like Benjamin Butterworth, but it is true though that we do have a fairly easy time. There's a very funny Louis C.K. routine where he says, "I'd rather be a white man at any part of in any part of history than a black man right now," which is a really funny kind of way of putting it, and it's so true. It's you have to think about a lot more stuff when you're not white, But this, basically, what I see this as is that white men saw that black people and women or people of colour and women were making great strides and getting more and more acceptance, and there were all these kind of diversity targets, and it was all kind of, it was all rumbling along, and everything seemed to be going okay. But men just wanted a bit of it, and so the best example is if you look at how the sports issue has elevated all these completely mediocre men, these chancers, and it's just elevated them. They're getting medals. They're standing on podiums. Sometimes I call this the revolution of mediocre men.
Yeah, it's very. I mean, I remember when Laurel Hubbard didn't actually win at the Olympics, and a lot of people were trying to use that as evidence that there is no advantage, and the fact that he was there at all demonstrates. But I suppose as well, in terms of this idea of punching down, it's very difficult to punch down on people that have the entire support of academic institutions, media, mainstream celebrities, corporations, etc. And one of the most sinister sort of allies in that sense for me are the police force, and we've seen numerous examples of women being approached and having their thinking checked or being told to remove signs, etc. And it can be quite traumatizing and upsetting. And I believe you've had a fair bit of experience on that score yourself, having interactions with the police.
Well, when the police came to my door on the orders of Adrian Harrop, who was since struck off for his online behaviour. They also rang me on behalf of Stephanie Hayden, who is a con man with a criminal history, and I think they also got in touch on behalf of David Paisley, who's just insane. So it's like there's the police have just been kind of, all these lunatics have been saying jump, and the police have been saying how high for the last 5 years. And the reason it's happened is because after Stephen Lawrence, they got so spooked by being called institutionally racist that they outsourced their common sense to people like Stonewall. And Stonewall tried to pretend that, like basically one of the reasons why Stonewall has such power is because gender identity ideology is so confusing and all over the place that they can just endlessly give the police lectures about it. See all these policemen writing down how many genders there are, and it's and they so successfully bamboozled them that the police have been working on behalf of trans rights activists for the last 5 years. And the thing is, these trans rights activists, my feeling about some of them is that if it wasn't for CCTV, they'd be killing people. I think CCTV basically meant serial killing went down, while online, trying to destroy people's lives online, went up. These people are deeply psychotic, and for the police to be working with them and not listening to these women, I still find it hard to believe we're at this place, The other thing about it is that, there's only about 10 people in the UK, and if the police did something about them, they would clean up nearly this whole fight, You get people who are just sadistic bullies, like there's a few just prior. James Billingham is one. He's not trans. He's just a father of two who lives to destroy people's livelihoods. David Paisley is another one. Stephanie Hayden. These are all dodgy people who are behaving in an extraordinary way, and the police could just put a stop to it. And it would clear the air so much in this whole fight if we took these, excuse my language, but scumbags out of the equation. I have a friend who taught autistic children in Wales, and he made fun of Stephanie Hayden's eyebrows, because Stephanie Hayden's avatar on Twitter uses more special effects than the film Avatar. He made fun of her eyebrows, and James Billingham cut the tweet out, made sure it was out of context, sent it to his employers, and he lost his accreditation to teach autistic children. That's who we're up against, And all we need to do, and again, all we need to do is just say, look, it's this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. Just tell them to leave women alone. You don't have to arrest them even. Just tell them to leave women alone, and put them in. Say they'll be in trouble if they keep doing it. That's all they need, and these people would cease to be a problem. But these are the people who they get into conversations, and they will take screenshots, remove context. They do everything they can to try and destroy you however they can, and they're successful because people are dumb. We're still babies with the internet. We're still waking up with the internet, and these people are just taking advantage because they're so much more tech savvy than everyone else. One of the things Stephanie Hayden did, you see, I was part of a world where everybody thought I was great. I was the writer of Father Ted, so I didn't think there was any. My wife and I didn't think there was any reason to hide our details. So we had our business address on the company's house. Stephanie Hayden released the company's house number, so people were able to look up where my wife worked, and it's like these people they know how to, they specialize in a kind of bespoke harassment, They'll find the weak links, and then they'll attack them relentlessly. I can only imagine the pressure my wife was under when I was with her, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, again, as I say, it needs an adult in the room. It needs someone in the police to go, hang on a sec. The problem isn't these peacefully, women doing speeches. The problem is the people shouting abuse and fucking throwing things at them, you know.
Graham, we've been speaking for an hour now, and I really appreciate your time. It's very nice to be able to agree with you rather than disagree with you. So I never thought I'd be here, really. And I suppose if I don't mention how great Big Train is again, my best friend will kill me
God
as well.
bless you.
We dig that. I have rebought that DVD so many times because I've lent it out to people and then forgot where it is.
Really?
So yeah, we still watch it way ahead of its time. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Is there anything else you would like to say before I let you get back to what's left of your evening?
I guess all I'll say is that, you know, if I did tangle with you in the days before my cancellation, and I behaved in a brisk or rude way, I'd like to apologise. You know, I was just kind of, I had this tunnel vision because I was unused to the internet and I didn't know that I was being influenced by people who weren't telling the truth. So, I hope that one day we can have a kind of year zero, if that just got some horrible connotations.
That's very apocalyptic.
Yeah, it's not great. Not great. Let me think of another one. A truth and reconciliation process. You know, that's I think what we need. Is we really need to go, hang on a sec, what happened to us in the last 5 years? Why did we go so crazy? You know? And once we do that, I think we'll be on the right path again.
There you go, being so fucking reasonable again. It's really disarming, but yeah, Graham, I appreciate that. That's very kind of you to say as well. So thank you very much, and thanks again for speaking to me.
Not at all. Really, really lovely to talk to you, Stephen.